Meet the press who have differing views on women's issues.
Meet the Press. An unrehearsed press conference is a public affairs presentation of NBC News.
Meet the Press originates today from the studios of KPRC in Houston, Texas, where the National Women's Conference is now meeting, and an opposition rally is also taking place. The conference was set up by the U.S. Congress to make recommendations for improving the status of women. The opposition rally was organized by opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, guests include ELEANOR SMEAL of Pittsburgh, president of NOW, the National Organization for Women; Margaret MEALEY of Washington, D.C., who retired last week as executive director of the National Council of Catholic Women after 28 years in that post; Audrey Rowe Colomb of Washington, D.C., immediate past chairwoman of the National Women's Political Caucus and director of women's activities at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting; Phyllis Schlafly of Alton, Illinois, founder and national chairman of Stop ERA and author of 9 books; Liz Carpenter of Austin, Texas, co-chair of ERA America and White House assistant during the Johnson presidency. Our reporters today include Peggy Simpson of the Associated Press, Ellen Goodman of the Boston Globe, James J. Kilpatrick of the Washington Star Syndicate, and Carol Simpson of NBC News. Ladies, starting out with Ms. SMEAL, may I ask each of you this question? The women at the conference last night whooped and hollered and cheered and demonstrated very enthusiastically when a resolution was passed in favor of the Equal Rights Amendment. If the ERA is enacted into law, what do you think would be its single most important effect on American women?
The most important effect would be that it would provide the kind of guarantee and the base for discrimination laws that would have the effect ultimately of improving employment and educational opportunities for women in the United States.
Ms. Mealy, what do you think the most important effect would be?
I think the most important effect would be the symbolism. I actually believe that women's inequities can be corrected through specific legislation. So that last night demonstrated, I think, the symbolism of an Equal Rights Amendment. I am not sure that each discrimination in law would have to be faced.
Your organization is opposed to ERA?
Yes, it is.
Ms. Rowe Colomb?
Well, it would finally mean that women would have the protection of the Constitution of the United States and would offer for us a base in which to have options to choose to have protections and to have laws that would provide for us true participation in this country.
Mrs. Schlafly?
It wouldn't have any good effect in terms of employment or education, but it would have a very far-reaching effect in terms of transferring power from the states to the federal government. Section 2 gives to the federal government, through Congress and the bureaus and the courts, the power to enforce any type of matter that is contemplated by the amendment.
Ms. Carpenter?
I think it would establish discrimination of women as it did with race in the 14th and 15th Amendment as a sometimes mechanism used against women. And I think that it would say for all time that women are equal and that they won't have to bring their cases piecemeal. I think
who are here represent large constituencies. And I think they're going away from here committed to improving the status of women in the United States. And it's that spirit that will, I think, bring it about.
In her keynote speech, Barbara Jordan called for a reaching out, a unity not only between women of differing views within the convention hall, but with women from who were meeting and demonstrating against women's issues. Has this been happening during the convention?
Well, one of the things that's very impressive about this convention is the wide diversity and array of people here. And I think that the people are enjoying it. We are talking together. People are on that floor moving around quite a bit and in the hotels. And I think that, in fact, I stood in front of the ERA. I didn't actually speak to it, but in front of a woman who was against it, and we were speaking together. I do feel there's no question there's a great philosophical difference. And those of us who are committed to equal rights for women and those who are committed not to have them, maybe we'll never agree on that. But, of course, we see our human interests. And I think that the key to it all, though, is the participation.
Ms. Goodman?
Ms. Mealy, as a commissioner of the IWI that formed the conference and someone against some of the main points in the National Plan of Action, do you feel, as Ms. SMEAL did, that there has been an open discussion at the conference of these issues?
Yes, I feel that there has been a real open discussion, and there has been opportunities for diverse points of view to be spoken. And I think that this isn't unusual to us who have worked in women's organizations over the years. We have worked together on issues that we feel that we can support each other, and we've always known that we've had different philosophies and diverse opinions. That hasn't gotten in our way of mutually supporting issues that we think should be corrected.
You don't have the feeling that the National Plan of Action has been, as some of the women charged, railroaded through the conference last night?
No, I don't believe so. I thought both chairs handled the diversity and the opinions as well as could be expected in such a large audience.
Mr. Kilpatrick?
Ms. Rocolone, unless the ratification period for the ERA is extended, time will run out in March of 1979. Where do you stand on this extension proposal?
Well, I think that it's a backup support for the activities, but I don't think it's something that's absolutely necessary. I feel as though we will be able to ratify.
Would it be a changing of the rules in the middle of the game if the time period were extended for 7 years?
No, I don't think it would be a changing of the rules in the middle of the game. I think different strategies are used at different times for different purposes. I don't think we're changing the rules at all.
But you seem to be stalled at 35 states. You believe the other 3 states can be obtained by March of 1979?
Oh, I think they can be obtained. We see the momentum building. We see the work that was done in various states with some of the legislators who have been opposed to ERA, who were unseated in this past election.
Virginia, for example?
Virginia, for example. And I think we're continuing to see that the organizations which support ERA are building, and the momentum is growing, and we're getting more and more people are becoming more informed of the issues and understanding now the implications of ERA.
Can I ask just about 2 other states besides Virginia where you think your possibilities are especially good?
Well, I think there are a number of areas where we can focus, but I would not want to be specific in various states.
Ms. Simpson, since there are 2 Simpsons among our reporters here, I'm going to use first names, if I may, to avoid confusion. So, Carol Simpson, please.
Thank you. Mrs. Schlafly, you have charged that Congress wasted $5 million giving it to the International Women's Year Commission to put on this conference here in Houston. But we do know where that money came from. You put on a rally yesterday, a pro-family rally, that attracted thousands of people. There were press releases, there were media contacts, there were brochures. I was deluged with material from your forces. Where did your money come from? There are charges that it has come from the John Birch Society and from other conservative organizations.
That is absolutely ridiculous. The people who put on the pro-family rally, which attracted 20,000 people yesterday, raised individual contributions to put it on in order to rent the Astro Arena. Then they took up a collection yesterday to pay the rest of the funds. The few press releases that we've put out, I would say our operation was in the neighborhood of $3,000 or $4,000 maybe at the maximum. However, we didn't have any tax money. The other side had $5 million of our tax money to put on their International Women's Year Convention. And we think that is a gross misspending of our tax funds to give it to a special interest group in order to pursue their goals, which they already decided a year and a half ago.
Suppose Congress had appropriated the funds for your forces. Would the money have then been misspent?
Oh, I don't think we would have wanted it, and I don't think we would have misspent it. But the proponents of the IWI came into Congress, like Bella Abzug and the others, and promised the congressman that there would be people for and against ERA and for and against abortion. And yet when they set up their plan a year and a half ago, in June of 1976, they voted unanimously to do all in our capacity to see that ERA is ratified at the earliest possible moment. That's what you saw last night. They are fulfilling the pledge that they made to use their money in order to ratify a constitutional amendment.
How would you have used the money?
I wouldn't have used the money. I don't think the federal government should be giving money to a special interest group to pursue its particular goals. I think the people who are for and against the Equal Rights Amendment should raise and spend their own money to express their own views. And I think we heard about momentum for ERA, but the momentum comes from the federal spending.
Peggy Simpson?
Ms. Carpenter, delegates, in giving this resounding approval of the plank calling for the ratification of the ERA, were in essence backing up the fundraiser of the night before, where Betty Ford and Rosalind Carter were appearing on behalf of the ERA. And I understand that ERA America raised about $100,000 for that. How is the money going to be spent, and how are you going to translate the money into concrete action at the state level, especially in the Bible Belt, where you really are stuck?
Well, we're stuck in 15 states, but we're stuck by just a small margin of 2 votes here and 3 votes there. And I think we got unstuck in Virginia last week, as Jim Kilpatrick said. 100,000 is probably high for the total amount. It's somewhere between 50 and 100 after we finish paying the bills for the fundraiser. But we're going to spend it wisely. We're going to spend it in education. We're going to spend it in sending in people who will organize and who will try to see that we get the various 130 women's organizations together that are part of ERA America. Not all of them, incidentally, are women's organizations. Everything from the American Bar Association to Zonta, including almost every group that's ever done anything in the field of human progress, are part of this. But we need to translate it at the grassroots on the individual congressman. Really, there I think just 16 members of legislatures who are standing as the blockade against the ratification of ERA in these states, and we want to beat them.
I understand that another purpose of a number of groups here, including ERA America, was to push this economic boycott that you have going in the states, like where you have big convention bureaus, New Orleans and Chicago and Las Vegas. Did you get any new sign-ups here, and is that really going to be effective? Can the Chamber of Commerce really change anybody's mind in the state legislatures?
They certainly can, and they have been trying to change minds. But I think the message is finally getting through that a lot of the Sun Belt cities that have been big convention cities, like Miami, like New Orleans, like Atlanta, where the Democratic Committee might want to hold its national convention, are not going to have the conventions of at least 30 national organizations held in those states, because that's the way you can make it felt. Texas, which has ratified the ERA, was the 7th state, too, is just abounding in conventions. And so this is a way to say it, to get there through the pocketbook. I remember Senator Kerr used to say that tourism has replaced cotton in so many of these states, and it's better than a good cotton crop and twice as easy to pick. And so I do think that states that drag their feet on human rights, on civil rights, and this was true in the civil rights movement, and on equal rights, are going to be considered, not a very hospitable place to go to.
Ms. Goodman?
Ms. Smeel, let me go back to the extension of the ERA for a minute. Now has been the chief organizing force behind trying to extend this, and it has caused some dissension even among ERA supporters. Do you think that this will take momentum away from passing the ERA before 79?
Of course not, because, see, one of the keys to the whole ERA issue is it is a national issue. It's a federal issue. The 35 states that have already ratified the ERA are actually involved, because you can't have equal rights in Pennsylvania unless it's ratified in 3 more states, for example. Anyway, I feel strongly that what this will do is put some more national focus on it, and that people in the ratified states have been very anxious to get back involved. The reason why we think it's so fair, in fact, it's not a change in the rules of the game. The Constitution does not have any time limits in it for the consideration of ratifications of amendments. The reason why we think it's so fair is that over 2/3 of the nation's population, through their state legislatures, have ratified the ERA. And it is still an issue before the public. There are as many distortions in the public eye, and this will give more time for consideration. Of course, at the same time we're doing this, We are moving in the unratified states, and we do hope to ratify as soon as possible and by 1979.
Is your hope for an extension an admission that you don't think you can pass it within this deadline?
What we think it is just giving the importance to the issue that it deserves. It's a national issue, and involves more than half the population, and there should not be an arbitrary deadline to cut off debate. We feel that the opposition is using that deadline because it's much easier to keep legislators changing their votes when they think they only have to do it one more time. We feel that the time issue should be eliminated, and what should be before the public is the Equal Rights Amendment and its effect on women and men in the United States.
Mr. Kilpatrick?
Ms. Mealy, you're identified here today generally with the opposition, with the antis as distinguished from the pros on this program. Are there any areas of agreement that you can find among the 26 issues that are advocated by the ERA proponents?
Yes, I don't look at the core agenda as an ERA proponent agenda. I think there are many issues. In fact, there are only 2 issues that we are in opposition to, the ERA and reproductive freedom. The other issues on the core agenda we support.
You suggested a while ago that you saw some symbolic value, perhaps, in ERA, unless I misunderstood you.
No. Yes. When I study the ERA, at this point in time, when so much legislation has corrected the inequities that women have suffered, that at this point in time, I think it'll be a symbolic victory rather than an actual victory.
In this area of sexual relations, the proponents of ERA say flatly in their book that the ERA will not require the states to permit homosexual marriage. In your understanding of the Equal Rights Amendment, why would it not require the states to permit homosexual marriage? Isn't to deny homosexual marriage a denial or an abridgment on account of sex?
I really don't feel free to answer that, Mr. Kilpatrick. I think that the whole issue of the homosexual is a civil rights issue. And I think that it would be up to a court interpretation in the individual states on how that would be applied.
In any event, it would be a long time, assuming the ERA is ratified by 1979. It won't become effective till 1981. It would be rather far in the future, would it not, before we get to these things?
Yes, certainly would. Right.
Carol Simpson?
The women's movement and feminism has not been particularly attractive to minority women in this country. There are very few in the top leadership ranks. I'm wondering, don't minority women care about women's rights?
I think that minority women are very concerned about women's rights. And this convention, for example, has a large number of minority women, not only as delegates, but as observers, as participants in various workshops. It's the first opportunity that minority women have really had an opportunity to participate in a national meeting of this scope and to actively share information, share views on various issues. I mean, we've been functioning in individual organizations, but now we have had an opportunity to come together and to look at all of the issues that we're supporting. And I think minority women have always been actively involved in the women's movement.
But that's one of the criticisms of the women's movement, that it attracts the intelligentsia, the social activists, the wealthy, and that there is not much support from housewives and from grassroots women, minority women included. Why is that?
Well, I don't know if that's more fact or the way the media has projected the participation of women within the women's movement. And at this conference, one of the things that is quite apparent as you look out into the group, that not only do we have housewives and minority women, we have low-income women, we have welfare women, we have young women, we have older women. We have the diversity of women in this country, and they are all participating eagerly in this meeting and having their voices heard. I think for many of the organizations, different organizations attract different kinds of people. And if we would really look at the number of women's organizations that are forming, we will find that more and more women from diverse groups are forming organizations to work on the issues of sex discrimination as it relates to them.
Peggy Simpson?
Ms. Schlafly, you predicted that Houston would be the death of the women's movement. Whether or not that is turning out to be true, what would that mean anyway?
I think that the people will realize, if they study the plan of action proposed by the International Women's Year Commission, what the women's lib movement is all about. That they are for the killing of unborn babies, that they are for giving homosexuals the right to teach in the schools and adopt children, that they are for getting the federal government in with a big bureaucracy to operate in a major role in child care, and that they are for the Equal Rights Amendment, which will mean the drafting of women among our next war and so forth. And I submit that this is not what the American people want. And contrary to what was said a moment ago about the interpretation about homosexuals or whatever being up to the courts in the individual states, all interpretations about the Equal Rights Amendment will be in the federal courts, and it will be federal enforcement and federal decision-making, and that is one of the main objections to it.
There was a Roper poll that was released this week that showed that 38% of the people questioned identified with the women's movement, but only 19% of those questions identified with you or with your views. Doesn't this more or less go against your point that the tide is against the women's movement?
No, it certainly doesn't, because I read that poll, and that is a poll that cannot be professionally defended. It was a poll that used loaded words to get the answers that they wanted. And the American people have been rejecting the Equal Rights Amendment. Every state that has considered it in the last 2 years has rejected it except one. And, of course, the biggest poll was the one when New York State voted on the Equal Rights Amendment in a state where the ERA people had everything going for them, and it was overwhelmingly defeated.
Ms. Goodman?
Yes, Ms. Carpenter, we seem to be reading polls this morning. I read a poll this morning by a Catholic organization which said that 68% of the Catholics were pro-ERA but anti-abortion. These two issues have been linked very strongly in the minds of the public. You are either pro-ERA and pro-abortion or anti-ERA and anti-abortion. Yet, there seems to be quite a split. And has the ERA America done anything? Are women who are anti-abortion welcome in the pro-ERA movement?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I hope that America will read the National Plan of Action, because it will deny a great many of the things that Mrs. Schlafly has been saying across this country. The ERA has nothing to do with abortion, nothing to do with co-ed bathrooms, nothing to do with all of the horrors which she has spread across the country in speeches throughout the country. Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. It simply says that. And we have many, many Catholic nun organizations, and these are really the working women in the Catholic organizations, the women who work closest to the poor. Nearly all of the organized nun organizations are very pro-ERA. We have many church women who are for the Equal Rights Amendment. Rose Kennedy, Lucy Johnson Nugent, many people who Sister Ann Ida Gannon, who was co-chair of ERA America in Chicago. All of these women are against abortion, very much for the Equal Rights Amendment, and I believe that the Catholic Church is waking up to the fact that equality of rights does not have anything to do with abortion.
We'll continue this special edition of Meet the Press shortly after these announcements. This is Bill Monroe inviting you to the second half of our special edition of Meet the Press with leaders of 5 national women's organizations.
Meet the Press continues after station identification.
Meet the Press is coming to you today from Houston, Texas, where the National Women's Conference and an opposition rally are both meeting. Our guests are ELEANOR SMEAL of NOW, the National Organization for Women, Margaret MEALEY of the National Council of Catholic Women, Audrey Rowe Colombe of the National Women's Political Caucus, Phyllis Schlafly of Stop ERA, and Liz Carpenter of ERA America. Our reporters today include Peggy Simpson of the Associated Press, Ellen Goodman of the Boston Globe, James J. Kilpatrick of the Washington Star Syndicate, and Carol Simpson of NBC News. May I start the second half by asking each of you, we'll start with Ms. Carpenter, go in reverse order. This question, women for and against ERA also seem to argue passionately about the proposal for a federal child care program. Why is that issue such a central one? Ms. Carpenter?
Well, I think all of us have different ideas on how children should be cared for. There are many people who think that the wages of domestics should be elevated enough that you can care for them in the home, and we're all floundering to find the best way. There are many that think that corporations which get to write off golf courses and airplanes should provide adequate child care facilities near the plant where the woman has to work. But, you know, the American family's changed a great deal, Bill, and the biggest percentage of American families are composed of two breadwinners. And so the working mother, which is most of us, are balancing how to divide that time and do right by both family and job.
Ms. Schlafly?
Well, we are for the best child care, and we think that's mother care and family care. And that is the way most children are taken care of today. What the IWI and the Women's Liberation Movement are proposing is child care financed by the taxpayers, universally available for all socioeconomic classes as a matter of right to give women their equality in not having to take care of their babies. And we object to that as a principle because we think that children should be taken care of within the family unit, and that almost any family care is preferable to any institutional care. And this is not a major responsibility which should be pushed off on the taxpayers. We have need programs to take care of people who are truly needy today.
Mrs. Rocolone?
I think what the child care recommendations that will be coming out of this conference will be focusing on is creating the opportunities, making the child care available to the increasing numbers of women who have to go out to work. I mean, family care, of course, would be preferable. But in many situations, family care is a young child with a key around her neck or his neck coming in and taking care of younger brothers and sisters. That is not quality and good child care, we feel, and women who have to go to work need to have available to them care for their children that they will not have to worry about their needs being met. In addition, we want to see more and more corporations and industries creating child care opportunities right there at the plant. You can have family care. A mother can go in and check on her child and see that the child is all right. But we need to make it available.
Why is federal child care such a vital issue between pro and anti-ERA women? Ms. Mealy?
I speak for our own organization, Mr. Monroe. We do not support ERA, but we support child care. And we feel that the majority of women really work because it's an economic necessity. And those children have to be taken care of with some responsibility. And we would look forward to the time when the voluntary sector and the federal government could have a partnership in this whole area of child care.
Mrs. Schlafly says they don't have to be taken care of by the federal government.
Well, I don't know where else you get that kind of funding. It's that simple.
Ms. Meal?
Well, we see it from two very major points. One is economic necessity and the need for adequate and quality care for families that absolutely not only can't afford child care, but in fact, it isn't available. And we have to have both points of view. I mean, it is not readily available in many communities. The second part, though, is educational and developmental. Good quality child care is good education. Why are we starting education at 6 or 7? Why aren't we saying that public schools are, in fact, the government taking care of children? Why do all of us believe in education, in public education? Because we know that the future of our nation depends on those young resources. And we also know today something we did not know years ago, that learning doesn't begin at a magic age of 6 or 7. In fact, if children start behind in those preschool years, they might never catch up. And that in those years, their peer development is so important. And as a matter of fact, we have only for this very limited time in our century had an individual conjugal family with a mother and child alone. It used to be that people were in extended family relationships with cousins and nieces and nephews and grandmothers and grandfathers and everybody around, and a child had all that stimulating atmosphere. Too many children today are being raised by the television set. So it's good for children, and it's very good and absolutely essential for families that both are employed outside the home.
Thank you. We'll continue our interview shortly. We'll continue our questions with Mr. Kilpatrick.
Ms. Meal, those of you who support the ERA have charged the opponents of the ERA with wholesale distortion of the purposes of this proposed constitutional amendment. Can you explain to me then this question? Most states, if not all states, have laws that prohibit homosexual marriage. Your ERA would prohibit the discrimination by reason of sex. Can you tell me why such laws would not become unconstitutional if ERA were ratified?
I'm really glad you gave me an opportunity to answer that question because, in fact, we don't have to do it in a hypothetical way or just think about what would happen in the future. There are 16 states with equal rights amendments.
These are state constitutional amendments.
That's right.
Yes.
And then none of those states, and some of them, for example, Pennsylvania has the exact same wording as the federal Constitution. And in none of those states does it permit homosexual marriages. And marriage and family law is regulated at the state level. So we don't have the reason why it's such a distortion is because there is a fact involved here. The Equal Rights Amendment in those 16 states has not legalized homosexual marriages.
However, I insist you are talking about state constitutional amendments interpreted by state courts. You're not talking about a federal constitutional amendment interpreted by the United States Supreme Court.
But it is the exact same wording, and you have to admit that the family and domestic relationships is an area of law that is regulated by the state.
Yes, now,
and
let me follow up on that if I may. Under Section 2 of this amendment, the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. What happens to these laws on domestic relations, marriage, and the family under Section 2 of your amendment? The states still have them?
Yes, as long as they're not discriminatory. Now, there's another distortion. That distortion is on support. The constant assertion is that the husband has the obligation for support.
Can we stick to the issue for just a moment? Would this transfer power to the Congress to legislate in these fields of domestic relations?
No, it only have one basic fact. As long as the law did not discriminate and deny a person their right, a woman or a man, on the basis of sex. So, if you had a law which said something about inheritance, and as long as either spouse would have equal chance for it and there would not be discrimination on the basis of sex, it would be constitutional.
You're missing the thrust of my question altogether, Miss Meal. I'm sorry. It's my fault. I'm sure I'm not asking clearly. Under this amendment, would the Congress have the power to provide one uniform divorce law, one uniform inheritance law, eliminating discrimination by reason of sex?
I believe not. It's clear that they only have the power to make sure that in fact, there is only one part of it, and that part is that nothing can discriminate. And it is very easy to write laws that are fair to both men and women.
Section 2, then, is absolutely meaningless.
Section 2 does guarantee one basic fact, and that is when a state or when the federal government writes a law, they must treat both males and females fairly.
Carol Simpson.
Sorry. Ms. Mealy, we are hearing talk in this country today about America's turn to the right. The conservative backlash appears to be winning new converts on issues that pertain to women, specifically the Equal Rights Amendment, abortion, daycare. Why are these issues being seized upon today?
I think they're being seized upon because women of all stations are getting education on the issues that they haven't received before. There has been a certain class of people in women's organizations that have been within the, times of changing issues. I think as the media portrays the questions that concern women, that there has been a veer to the right. And I'm sure that this is probably, motivated by fear. For instance, the ERA and the whole family structure, women are fearful of this. They really don't know what the ERA means. It's a general amendment. It lends itself to interpretation, and there is a fear of people who really aren't maybe secure in their own homes or with their families. So I think this is true, and I think actually the women's conference here and the state meetings have probably stimulated this somewhat.
Peggy Simpson?
Ms. Colomb, there were several Republicans who were quoted in the paper this week saying that they thought one was a California congressman, another one was a newly elected chairman of the Harris County Republican Party here in Houston. And they said that they thought that most of the delegates to the conference here were radical liberals or lesbians. In fact, Ms. Schlafly has been saying much the same thing. These people, however, went a little further and said that most of the delegates were misfits and outcasts and they really should get out of town. Now, it's unclear whether they were including Betty Ford in that category or Mary Louise Smith, who's the immediate past chairman of the Republican National Committee. But do you think this was an accurate characterization of the people at the conference?
Oh, absolutely not. I don't think that all of the people at the conference represent the diversity in this country, and I would not call any of I would not agree with any of the statements by the Harris County chair. Besides, the Republican Party has supported this conference. They have supported individuals to attend this conference as a national organization, invited to attend the same way all other national organizations were invited. Myself included as a Republican. I don't think I'm a misfit, and I have been actively involved. I think that the feeling on the part of the California representative and the Harris County representative is they were totally misinformed, and they didn't even bother to talk to any of the individuals who were present to find out why we were participating in this effort.
Well, what does it really say, though, about the future of women in the Republican Party? These are mostly Republicans rather than Democrats who are organizing against the conference and against the women's movement.
Well, I think the future of Republican women is very positive. We're continuing to develop an understanding of the issues. The support of the Equal Rights Amendment has always been an issue that the Republican Party has had in its platform. I don't think this affects any of the involvements of the Republican women in women's issues.
Ms. Goodman?
Mrs. Schlafly, let me ask you a relatively simple question compared to the complex ones. Many people here feel that you have been using the conference and the counter-conference for your own political career. Can I ask you just directly, are you planning to run for the Senate in Illinois?
I'm going to announce that in a couple more weeks. I'm sorry I'm not ready to announce that today. I'm going to confer with my family over Thanksgiving. But it is very difficult when I'm only one member of this panel with 4 members of the IWI Commission to answer the many things that are said. But I would like to comment on Ms. Carpenter accusing me of spreading horrors. When ERA was going through the Congress, Senator Sam Ervin proposed 9 amendments which would have exempted women from the draft and from military combat duty, which would have safeguarded the laws protecting privacy of men and women, boys and girls, and which would have safeguarded the rights of wives, mothers, and widows. And every one of those amendments was voted down by the proponents who did not want any exception, who want us to not be able to differentiate between men and women.
Mr. Kilpatrick?
Miss Carpenter, we've been old friends a long time. You equated the sex and race in your original answer to Bill Monroe. Now, if sexual discrimination and race discrimination constitutionally would be the same thing, where do you wind up on access to public facilities? Now, in Washington, in a federally owned office building, black and white women use the same toilet facilities, black and white men use the same toilet facilities.
I would hope so.
You could not deny access to the toilet facility by reason of race, right? You could not say, assign colored women here, white. Now, if your equation stands up, how could you deny access to any rooms in a public facility by reason of sex?
Well, that's ridiculous. The right of privacy predates the right of any other law. And the old toilet The old toilet argument
Well, I'm
seems to
asking
have
you
been
to
the one
explain
that's
this.
been used over and over. It was used in the press galleries, if you'll remember, Jim, back when we were all in the media covering Congress, and for so long women couldn't be members of the same press club and other things. We couldn't even get into the press galleries because they could not overcome that barrier, and that is that's ridiculous.
How constitutionally could you say to a woman, you cannot go in that room?
Well, because nobody's going to say that to a woman. We worked it out on airplanes pretty sensibly, and I'm quite sure that the opponents of it are going to try to make something ridiculous of it with cases of it here and there. They're going to be testing it. You see, the ultra-right's panicking, and they are latching on to the ERA as the one thing that can rally them, even though women have been very low on their agenda for a long time. They have had other issues. They're in the hate business, and they are hate mailing houses, and it's a way to draw this tight little group together. Even though I am a psalm-singing Democrat, let me point out that the strong part of the Republican Party and the major part of the Republican Party have long been, and even 2 years before the Democrats put the Equal Rights Amendment in their program, the Republican Party did, and they have kept it there. We've had 7 presidents for us. We've had Betty Ford sent us the first check for ERA America. Lady Bird Johnson sent the second one. And we have support of the very strong, bright, young Republican woman. But they're in panic, and they're latching on to anything that is vital and alive and moving. And the women's movement today in this country is moving faster than any other movement. And on that subject, incidentally, of minorities that you asked a moment ago, Miss Simpson, yesterday Coretta King said something very interesting to me. She said, you know, Vernon Jordan should be here. Well, and Jesse Jackson should be here, and welcome. We worked hard for civil rights, and I will be so happy to see some of the strong leaders of the black movement get in there and help us get those 3 black votes we don't yet have in South Carolina and 1 or 2 other states, because they're very identifiable causes.
Carol Simpson.
Miss SMEAL, forgive me for yet another poll, but a recent Roper poll showed that only 18% of women polled nationwide had ever heard of the IWI Women's Conference or of the state conventions that were held in each state to elect delegates to the convention. And the critics of the conference have charged that the conference is not representative of women nationwide. And that poll would seem to lend some credence to that. What happened? Why did so few women know that any of this was going on?
Actually, the poll, I think, states an awful lot about public issues in our country and the interest in community-wide issues. You know, if you ask the average person if they know their state senator or their state representative, far fewer than 18%. I think the national average now is something like under 6% know those names. Actually, we tried very hard. All the major organizations, and over 1,000 of them, were mailed to. There was public service announcements, and there was all sorts of personality appearances in various cities throughout these states. And in fact, about 150,000 people participated directly. And I feel that this has been a tremendous experience in direct democracy, as a matter of fact, because they could participate directly on an issue and not just on personality. So although it wasn't as great as we had hoped, it certainly was enlifting to.
But we have about a minute and a half. Peggy Simpson.
Ms. Mealy, what do you think about the proposals that would require companies to extend pregnancy benefits to women workers if the companies already have sick leave planned for other workers? A lot of right to life people favor that because they say the alternative may have to be abortion for poor women who have to work.
Yes, we support pregnancy rights and maternity leave and return to the position, the whole positive effort on the pregnancy rights.
Ms. Goodman?
Let me ask Ms. Colum, this conference was called to see if there is a consensus among women. Why should there be a consensus among 53% of the population?
I don't think the conference was called to see if there was a consensus. The conference was called to identify the barriers and to make recommendations to the president for eliminating these barriers. And at this conference, there was consensus last night on issues. We will end up with consensus on all of the platform issues, but we will have differing points of view as to how to approach it.
I hope we have time for a short question and a short answer. Mr. Kilpatrick?
Section 2 says that Congress shall have the power to enforce this amendment. What does that mean to you, Mrs. Schlafly?
It means under Supreme Court interpretations in Katzenbach versus Morgan and interpretations of other constitutional amendments that have the same language, that the federal government through Congress can preempt the field and just substitute its judgment for that of the states. And the states can go on passing laws to suit their heart's content, but they'll be overruled by Congress and the Supreme Court. And I think the filibuster that happened here on my left and an attack on the motives of the opponents is a good example of what we've been up against all through this fight.
Our time is up. Thank you, ladies, for being with us today on Meet the Press. I'll be back in a minute with a look at letters.